Hey, sisters and brothers, welcome to week 17 of Read Through the Bible in 2 years. In our Old Testament readings, we continue with the book of Leviticus. And I realize it hasn't been the most exciting of all the readings, full of these 613 laws that God gave to Moses from Mount Sinai. However, in the readings that are coming up, there are readings now about laws of which we still hear a great deal about even to today, including the festival of the Day of Atonement, that day when the priest, in this case it was Aaron, the brother of Moses, would take a goat and lay his hands upon that goat and confess the iniquities of the whole people of Israel over that goat and let that goat go into the wilderness. That goat became known as the scapegoat, that which we still hear about scapegoating today, that idea that we put onto the shoulders on a particular group of people what we think is the iniquities of all of our society's problems. Of course, back in Nazi Germany, it was the Jewish people that were made into the scapegoats of the German people. And nowadays, you often hear about even immigrants as being the scapegoats of all that's wrong in society is because of immigrants. Well, the term scapegoat comes from this particular custom of the Day of Atonement. And then following that, there are a whole host then of laws that God gives to Moses to tell God's people about things to avoid. And if you recall that before God began to give these laws to Moses, he began by saying this. This is from Exodus chapter 19. He says, "Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation." You know what it means to be a holy nation is somebody who is set aside, is someone who is different than the nations and the tribes that are around them. And so what God gives in these upcoming chapters are a whole host of laws of things to avoid, things that go on in the other tribes of Canaan, that God says, no, my people are going to be different than that. These are what you are to do that are different than what you see in those peoples that you will be coming upon when you enter into the promised land. And so that is the Old Testament lessons. And when you get into the New Testament lessons, we are still in Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. And if you recall in that, Paul has founded that community in Corinth, and then he went and spent a great deal of time there training leaders, lifting up people to help and shepherd that community. And then Paul went on. But very soon thereafter, Paul began to receive letters from the people in Corinth about divisions that are taking place in that particular congregation. And so Paul writes a letter back addressing some of the problems that are going on there. And in this particular part of the letter of First Corinthians, Paul has to defend himself. Paul is being accused of doing things that he didn't do, and so he needs to defend himself. So in chapters 9 and chapters 10, there's a whole host of things where Paul says, "No," he says, "did I take advantage of you? No, of course I did not take advantage of you. And those who accuse me of taking advantage of you are wrong." And then Paul begins to address some of the liturgical practices that are going on that are, instead of building the unity of the congregation, are tearing the congregation apart. And so the 11th chapter of First Corinthians is a whole teaching about communion, about the Lord's Supper, and the proper way to think about the Lord's Supper. So, folks, as you continue to read through the Bible in these 2 years, I encourage you to keep with it, to stay with it. Don't get too far behind. And as you catch up to continue to read your scripture, to know more about scripture, to know more about this world in which Jesus would live and would be born into, and the religious practices that he would be born into, so that we understand more and more about the teachings of Jesus, because we are called to be apprentices of this Jesus. Thank you.